the elevator app. Martin had always been fascinated by new technology, the kind that promised convenience and novelty. When he discovered the elevator app on his phone, a sleek interface that claimed to control the building's elevators remotely, he downloaded it immediately, intrigued by its promise of secret features. The app's instructions were cryptic. Tap the hidden floor to access levels beyond the ordinary. It sounded like a gimmick, a clever marketing trick, yet the thrill of potential discovery made him impatient. That evening, in the dim lobby of his apartment building, he stared at the glowing screen, heart quickening with anticipation. The elevator itself was unremarkable. Brushed steel, dim fluorescent lighting, the faint smell of machinery and metal. Martin stepped inside, testing the app. He swiped, tapped, and finally pressed a discreet button labeled X, a floor that did not appear on the physical elevator panel. The car hummed quietly, then descended at a pace that felt oddly deliberate. The numbers on the app ticked upward, yet the conventional panel displayed nothing. A subtle vibration coursed through the floor beneath his feet, a rhythm that seemed almost sentient. At first he thought it was a bug, a digital illusion. But as the elevator continued, the walls appeared to lengthen imperceptibly, stretching like the hallways in an Escher drawing. Light flickered in patterns that were unsettling, shadows twisting at odd angles. Martin pressed the physical buttons, expecting to halt the car or return to a known floor, but the mechanisms ignored him entirely. Panic edged his curiosity. The app displayed X+1, and then X+2, floors that were not only unmarked but impossible according to the building's blueprint. With each floor, the air grew heavier, almost viscous, filled with a faint hum that seemed to resonate within his chest. A cold draft brushed against his neck, carrying whispers so faint he could barely discern words. Yet it was enough to make him glance nervously at the reflective elevator walls. He caught glimpses of movement that didn't belong to him, fleeting silhouettes that melted into the corners, shadows that lingered longer than natural laws allowed. The reflection of himself seemed slightly off, distorted, elongated, as though the elevator's environment was reshaping reality itself. A sense of claustrophobia mingled with fascination. Martin knew he should abandon the experiment, yet a deeper, almost magnetic pull urged him forward. The app displayed a simple message now: prepare for the hidden floor. His fingers hovered over the phone, unsure whether to tap again. The elevator groaned, a low mechanical protest that quickly gave way to silence. The hum in the walls ceased, replaced by an eerie stillness. Martin's pulse quickened as the realization struck. He was no longer traveling through familiar space. The elevator had become a threshold, and the hidden floor was not just another level but an entry into a world governed by different rules. At that moment, the doors began to slide open. The space beyond was obscured in mist, faintly illuminated by an unknown light source that cast elongated, indistinct shadows across the floor. Martin froze, the phone trembling in his hand. The app now displayed only one instruction: step forward. Hesitation clawed at him, yet a compulsion stronger than fear urged him to obey. He lifted his foot toward the mist, the air thick with a scent of iron and something unidentifiable, almost alive. Something waited beyond the threshold, silent but patient, ready to test the limits of perception and control. Martin hesitated at the threshold, his senses screaming that he should retreat, yet a strange compulsion anchored him to the edge. The mist beyond the elevator doors swirled as though alive, curling around invisible obstacles and moving with a rhythm that felt almost sentient. When he stepped forward, the floor beneath his feet seemed to ripple slightly, a subtle distortion that made him question whether he was walking on solid ground or floating through some intangible plane. The air was thick, damp, and cold. Every breath he drew carried a metallic tang, a faint reminder of the machinery below, yet tainted with something unearthly. The elevator doors slid shut behind him, leaving no trace of the familiar lobby. Shadows moved independently of any discernible light, shifting across the mist in patterns that suggested intent. Martin's own shadow flickered strangely, elongating and contracting, and occasionally seeming to act before his body did. The app's screen glowed faintly in his hand, its simple interface now displaying a series of arrows and cryptic numbers that made no sense. As he ventured further, vague shapes began to emerge from the haze. At first they were no more than silhouettes, tall and thin, their movements jerky and unnatural. He squinted, trying to focus, and glimpsed faces, or what resembled faces, glimmering momentarily in the fog before dissolving back into obscurity. The soundscape was equally disorienting. The distant hum of elevators from below mixed with whispers that seemed to emanate from the mist itself. Occasionally he caught words, fragmented and distorted: return, follow, never. The sentences twisted and recombined in his mind, a language that was almost intelligible but always evasive. Martin felt a creeping unease, a sensation that the space was alive and observing him. Each step he took was mirrored by subtle shifts in the shadows around him, as though the environment itself anticipated his movements. He tried to tap the app, hoping it would guide him back, but the screen flickered and went blank for a moment. When it lit again, it displayed a new instruction: do not stop. Keep moving. Panic gnawed at him, yet he obeyed, compelled by a logic he could not fully understand. The hidden floor was no longer a novelty, it was a labyrinth, and he was already entangled within it. A faint light appeared ahead, dim and wavering, revealing glimpses of a corridor lined with mirrored panels. As Martin approached, he noticed the mirrors did not simply reflect him. They showed variations of himself, subtly different in posture, expression, and attire. Each reflection seemed aware, each one anticipating his next motion, smiling faintly, or frowning, sometimes shaking its head in silent warning. He reached out, fingertips grazing the cold glass, and the reflections flinched simultaneously. The sense of being watched intensified, a psychological pressure pressing on his chest as though the space sought to manipulate his mind. Suddenly, the whispers coalesced into a more coherent voice, low and melodic, resonant in the mist. Why do you resist, Martin? You cannot leave until you understand. The name drawn from the app pierced his thoughts. He spun around, searching for the source, but the fog remained opaque, unyielding. Panic surged, but a fragment of curiosity persisted. What did he need to understand? The mirrors offered no answers, only possibilities and shadows of his own fear. Martin took a cautious step forward, drawn toward the dim corridor, aware that each movement could alter reality in unpredictable ways. The floor beneath him seemed less stable now, subtly tilting and stretching as though the hidden floor itself were conscious. Behind him, faint metallic clicks echoed, like elevator mechanisms trying and failing to return him to familiar territory. The journey into the hidden level had begun in earnest, and Martin realized that ordinary laws of physics and logic no longer applied. As he advanced, the reflections in the mirrors multiplied, converging and diverging, each one whispering fragments of warnings and encouragements. The corridor extended endlessly, a psychological maze designed to test perception, patience, and courage. He could no longer distinguish his own actions from the suggestions of the space around him. Every step increased the tension, every whisper amplified his awareness that this hidden floor was not merely a physical place but a psychological trap, alive and deliberate. The corridor stretched endlessly, a surreal labyrinth where shadows clung to the edges of Martin's vision. Each step seemed to echo unnaturally, resonating in a way that suggested the floor itself listened. Occasionally, faint glimmers of movement appeared in the mist, shapes that flickered in and out of reality, never fully materializing. Martin realized with growing dread that these were not ordinary shadows. They were echoes of those who had once dared to explore the hidden floors before him. He attempted to retrace his steps, but the corridor had subtly shifted. Angles that should have been familiar twisted unexpectedly, corners stretched impossibly, and the doors he thought he had passed were gone. The app's glow became his only point of orientation, though even it flickered in rhythm with the whispers. Martin held the phone tightly, fingers trembling, feeling a creeping awareness that his movements were anticipated by forces unseen. Every decision seemed preordained by the hidden floor itself, as though he were a character in a story written by some malevolent intelligence. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were no longer fragmented words but sentences that brushed the edges of comprehension, probing his thoughts. Step closer, See yourself, choose? Martin shivered, realizing that the reflections in the mirrors along the corridor were not merely copies. They were interactive, responding to his fears. Each mirrored self exhibited different expressions. Some terrified, some mocking, some pleading silently. They seemed to speak through gestures, each movement a subtle push toward decisions Martin was not ready to make. A sudden chill swept through the corridor and the mist thickened. The mirrored reflections began to act independently, stepping slightly forward when he hesitated, tilting their heads in silent question. Martin's mind strained to interpret their intent. He tried to cover the mirrors with his hands, desperate to stop the intrusive presence, but the reflections ignored him, continuing their silent communication. He felt the first real pang of panic. He was no longer in control, and the hidden floor had begun to rewrite his perception of reality. Then came the sound of footsteps behind him. They were slow, deliberate, matching the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Martin spun around, expecting to see another person, but there was no one, only the faint suggestion of movement through the mist. The app vibrated in his hand, a low thrumming that seemed to sync with the heartbeat echoing in the corridor. Its screen displayed a single word now: follow. Martin hesitated. Part of him screamed to run, to abandon the floor entirely, but curiosity, and some indefinable compulsion, propelled him forward. As he moved, he began to notice subtle distortions in the environment. The air shimmered slightly, creating heat ripples that warped the walls, making them appear fluid rather than solid. Shadows elongated and merged, forming shapes reminiscent of hands reaching for him, though when he glanced directly, they dissolved into nothingness. The whispering voices crescendoed in an unsettling harmony, urging him to see, to understand, to submit. Martin stopped before a particularly large mirror, its surface darker than the others. The reflections inside were no longer passive. They began to mimic actions he had not performed yet. One mirrored self reached for a door that did not exist in the real corridor. Another mirrored self smiled faintly, a cruel knowing that sent a shiver down his spine. He realized that the hidden floor was probing him, testing the boundaries of his mind, daring him to act in ways he would not otherwise. He raised the phone, intending to record what was happening, but the app's screen dissolved into static, leaving only a faint glow in his palm. The reflections leaned closer, their eyes deep pools of anticipation. Martin felt his pulse quicken, the pressure in the corridor intensifying, as if the very walls pressed inward. He understood now that the hidden floor was a living entity, responding to fear, curiosity, and hesitation, shaping itself around his psyche. The dark mirror pulsed subtly as though breathing. Martin's reflection smiled, but he had not moved his lips. The whispered commands intensified, overlapping in a maddening chorus that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere. Step inside, become part of us. There is no escape. Each word drilled into his mind, unraveling certainty, pushing him toward the mirror. He realized that hesitation might be fatal. The corridor seemed to stretch infinitely, twisting and folding like a living organism. Every step Martin took altered the space, walls bending, shadows twisting into grotesque forms. The reflected selves multiplied, their movements now coordinated, circling him as if testing his reactions. One reflection stepped forward aggressively, then merged with another, forming a taller, more menacing figure. It mirrored his fear with precision, forcing him to confront his deepest anxieties, his isolation, his indecision, his desire to flee even as he was compelled to advance. The app vibrated violently in his hand. Its screen flashed, "Do not resist." Panic surged, and Martin attempted to throw it away, but an invisible force anchored it to his palm. The reflections now reached toward him, hands elongated, faces twisting in impossible expressions, their silent insistence becoming almost unbearable. Martin stumbled backward, tripping over a space that no longer seemed solid. The mist thickened, filling his lungs with a choking cold that numbed his senses. Suddenly the corridor fractured. He found himself standing on multiple floors at once, staircases and hallways overlapping, creating impossible angles. Each reflection occupied a different plane, their eyes following him, merging and splitting with every flicker of light. Martin realized that the hidden floor was not bound by physical reality, it was a sentient construct, feeding on attention and fear, capable of bending space and perception. A sharp voice cut through the whispers, clearer and more authoritative than the rest. "Choose, Martin. Your mind, or ours." The mirror rippled, forming an aperture that seemed to draw him in. Hesitation was impossible. The pull was irresistible. He glimpsed versions of himself trapped inside the mirror, twisted and terrified, reaching out, begging for escape, but their forms dissolved the moment he tried to focus. Each second stretched into eternity, the space warping around the intensity of his dread. Martin's mind raced. He understood that submission would mean becoming another echo, another reflection, another lost fragment in the hidden floor's labyrinth. But resistance required clarity and courage. Clutching the app like a lifeline, he tried to impose willpower on the space. The whispers escalated into a roar, shadows lunging, reflections contorting in grotesque mockery. He shouted, an instinctive act of defiance, and the corridor shuddered violently, the mirrors vibrating as if resisting his attempt to assert control. In the chaos, he noticed a single reflection that remained calm, its eyes steady, unmoving. It mimicked not his fear but his intention, his desire to survive and escape. Martin focused on it, ignoring the cacophony of whispers and the twisting shadows. He stepped toward it, and for a brief moment the corridor held its breath. The mist parted slightly, revealing a faint doorway of faintly glowing light beyond the mirror. The hidden floor seemed to hesitate, recoiling from the clarity of his will. Time seemed to stretch, every heartbeat a drumbeat of suspense. Martin's reflections surged, some reaching toward him, some retreating, but he pressed forward, compelled by a mixture of instinct and resolve. The doorway shimmered, offering the promise of reality, of solid ground, yet he knew the hidden floor's influence was never fully gone. One final glance at the dark mirror revealed countless versions of himself, some screaming, some smiling, all frozen in that eternal moment of anticipation. Martin hesitated only for a heartbeat before stepping through the glowing doorway. The corridor's oppressive weight seemed to push against him, shadows stretching and flailing as if attempting to pull him back. The reflections lunged, but each strike dissolved against the threshold's radiant light, leaving Martin momentarily unscathed. He stumbled into a narrow, solid hallway, its walls ordinary, tangible, and quiet, a stark contrast to the surreal chaos he had just endured. Breathing heavily, Martin glanced back, half expecting the hidden floor to follow, but the doorway shimmered faintly, reflecting only his exhausted face. The app in his hand was now inert, its screen blank, though a faint hum hinted at lingering power. He realized with a mixture of relief and unease that the hidden floor had retreated, for now. But its influence lingered in his mind, a subtle whisper beneath his thoughts that suggested it was always watching, always waiting. As he navigated the hallway, each step grounded him further in reality. Ordinary doors lined the walls, and the familiar smells of the building, cleaning solvent, varnished wood, reassured him of the material world. Yet Martin could not shake the feeling of surveillance. The reflections, the twisted corridors, the echoing whispers, they had left a mark. His perception of space remained slightly off, as if angles might shift if he lingered too long in one place, or shadows might suddenly behave with sinister intent. Reaching the main lobby, he noticed the elevator he had originally entered. It appeared unremarkable now, the control panel clean and inert. Curiosity gnawed at him despite the terror he had endured. He touched the buttons lightly, testing their function, and the car chimed obediently, but no hidden floors, no shifting corridors, no reflections. The space seemed normal, but Martin's mind, forever attuned to subtle distortions, remained vigilant. Exiting the building, Martin stepped into the street, night air cool against his skin. He paused, taking in the ordinary cityscape, the distant hum of traffic, the muted glow of streetlights. For a fleeting moment, relief overtook fear. But then, from the corner of his vision, he glimpsed a shadow detached from any object, moving with a purpose, lingering at the edge of perception. A faint echo of the whispers from the hidden floor brushed his consciousness, and he instinctively knew that the entity had not vanished, it was merely waiting for the next moment, the next unsuspecting visitor. Martin's hand tightened around the app, still inert but now an uneasy talisman. He realized survival was not about defeating the hidden floor, it was about recognition, awareness, and careful navigation of the thresholds it controlled. Every reflective surface, every shadow, every subtle distortion might conceal it. And the thought of returning home offered no real comfort, for in his apartment, in mirrors, in fleeting reflections of the day-to-day, he could feel its latent presence. The story concludes with Martin walking into the quiet street, blending into ordinary life while the hidden floor watches from its unseen dimension. The whispers have receded, but a faint glow lingers in the back of his mind, suggesting that the cycle is far from over. Somewhere the hidden floor waits patiently, a perpetual labyrinth of perception and fear, poised for the next encounter. The app's screen flickers faintly in his pocket, a reminder that curiosity, once piqued, may never be satisfied. Martin moves forward, cautious but resolute, the city's ordinary night masking the extraordinary terror lurking just beyond sight. And somewhere in the hidden folds of space, the shadows stir, ready to test the next mind that dares to step inside.